Welcome. This is the Free Market Roadshow, probably the largest annual series of public conferences on economics. Remarkable experts are discussing the challenges and providing libertarian solutions to today's problems. Organized by the Austrian Economic Center in cooperation with select institutes, universities and think tanks, the Free Market Roadshow tours all over Europe. Today we pay a visit to Zagreb.
Hello everyone, my name is Steven Bartulica and I want to thank you for joining us today at this year's Free Market Roadshow. I represent a small conservative think tank called the Center for Renewal of Culture, and we're pleased to say that we've been part of this great event since 2009. The Center promotes limited government, the principles of individual responsibility, free market economics, and pro-family policies. We've been in the business of the think tank world for the last 12, 13 years as an independent, small institution working here in Zagreb, and we're very happy to be part of this great group of think tanks that host the Free Market Roadshow. This year we're focusing on the situation in Europe. The corona crisis has created new circumstances under which our economies are functioning, and we're concerned about, of course, greater state intervention. So we want to put this all on the table. Hopefully you can join us for the discussions. They're always lively and interesting. And I hope to see you soon again. Thank you.
He who pays, creates. It's an old saying, and for millennia has represented the bitter pill that must be swallowed by those who depend on outside financing. Of course, the degree of external dependency decreased with the increased civilization and democratization. Nevertheless, it is undisputed that there are conditions attached to outside capital. In the best case, it is the condition of punctual repayment, perhaps supplemented by some formal aspects. It becomes more problematic when it comes to earmarking, or even when certain rules of conduct are included. In the worst case, a loan creates corruption. To ensure that the consequences of the measures that combat COVID-19 did not lead to the immediate end of countless economic livelihoods, politicians had to provide money. Almost overnight, a not inconsiderable part of the population became recipients of state support. Direct flows of money on the one hand and deferrals on the other were packaged in complicated systems linked to conditions and applications accompanied by threats of checks and penalties, and ultimately paid out in billions. The necessity of the support packages as a logical, correct consequence of the political restriction of private business activity is undisputed. The fact that their amount is in many cases insufficient or tied to unfulfillable conditions is an additional problem. Nor do we want to go into the fact that as a further consequence, the debt burden of future generations has multiplied abruptly. Rather, we are concerned with the problem of dependency. We live in a constitutional state. It seems to be the normal thing that the one who caused the damage has to pay for it. It is not up to him to attach further conditions to the fulfillment of his duty, to postpone his reparation, or even to refuse it. In our case, the state is the one. Weighing up various risks, a damage that was not foreseeable at the time of the decision was accepted in order to protect general health. Even today, the long-term consequences are hardly predictable, especially those resulting from psychological stress, missed education, and social isolation. Yet, it is accepted that the state attaches conditions to support. In many areas, these conditions seem so self-evident that their mention is surprising. But others make people feel like beggars. As a reminder, this is taxpayers' money. Money that has already been collected, or money that future taxpayer generations will have to pay. We know, of course, that months of widespread economic stagnation cannot be fully replaced by taxpayers' money. So we have to accept that money cannot be provided for everyone, and not to the same extent. So how are states' funds to be used, and what indirect control mechanisms are thus served? We assume, of course, that politicians have no bad intentions, that the fact that more and more of the population receives its income directly or indirectly from government agencies will not lead to any steering of individual behavior. We may even agree that bailout packages for large corporations and companies are being attached to certain obligations that seem to be in general interest. For example, in the interest of environmental protection, the discontinuation of short-haul routes in the flight schedules of an airline that would have not survived the travel ban without state aid, or that structuring measures are restricted by the extended protection against dismissal of employees on short-time work. But what if insidiously the political understanding changes, when the urge to steer, to give direction, to bring about a change in behavior takes over? What if good behavior becomes a condition for civic rights? What if individuals can be excluded from receiving state benefits because they do not meet certain conditions? At what point is the basic law at danger? Never before such a large number of people has been dependent on the state for their economic livelihood. Reports on insolvencies and lending seem paradoxical, but confirm that state intervention is having an effect. In 2020, the insolvency rate in Austria fell, and demand for business loans as well as for consumer loans to private households also fell significantly from the second quarter of 2020. Companies and private individuals got by thanks to state assistance. This is good news, except for the fact that they have lost their independence and also run the risk of facing even greater problems when the aid measures end. All those who are supported and protected not only accept quite obvious conditions, but also assume a moral responsibility to share those measures that have led to their dependence. Competition for the non-infinite resources leads to further pressure. All too easily, the problem is projected onto another level. An us versus them is created. A situation that becomes a stress test for a society and tempts to exercise political power. When politics allocates funds on a large scale, it is our duty to be particularly vigilant.
Welcome everybody watching our conference online. Thanks, dear Barbara, on your speech. You are the real spirit movements of this entire free market roadshow. I'm Ate Čurić, Secretary General of Center for the Renewal of Culture, and I'll moderate today's conference. At all costs was the approach of responding to the pandemic of the most governments. We all know and feel the results. But other than complaining and identifying scapegoats, the free market roadshow discusses ways out of the gridlock. we turn our attention to the sensitivity of individual and entrepreneurial freedom and civil rights and how these are the foundations of recovery. We will try to open different views and we will encourage discussion on the spirit of freedom and innovation that leads to progress and prosperity. Topic of our conference here in Zagreb will be public support and the increasing public sector. Dependency is the first door being opened to totalitarianism. Today we have three distinguished guests with us who will each have their short introduction statements. And we will go to the panel, and then after their statements we'll go to the panel discussion. First is our president of the Center for the Renewal of Culture, Mr. Steven Bartulica. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mate. I want to send my greetings from Zagreb to the team in Vienna. It's our pleasure to be hosting this event again in Croatia. Our center has been a partner in this endeavor since 2009. We're very pleased to still be a part of this. There's still much work to do, and we'll be discussing some of the implications of the corona pandemic, which is still preoccupying many policymakers and our think tanks, of course. Dependency, of course, is a concern for all of us. Croatia is still, I would say, on a daily basis fighting the legacy of socialism. People here are still inclined to expect too much from the government. And this whole situation has just reinforced some of these tendencies. So we're fighting against this. I am not a health expert, but my intuition is that many of these measures that have been in place are not, in fact, justified looking at the numbers and the mortality rate for people under 70, the working population in our countries. And I think it's clear that the lockdowns were not successful in bringing the numbers down. So I'm pleased to say that in Croatia we did not have the strictest measures applied, which is a good thing, but we have had a decline, of course, in our GDP last year, about over 8%. Where are we now? Well, one distinguished thinker said that politicians are not interested in solving your problems, they're interested in solving their problems. And when you look at it from this point of view, their problems in many ways have been solved, because at the European level, we have this new recovery plan that is a multi-year extending to 2027. We know the EU has, as an entity, raised capital to finance these policies. And I tell people that those who are entering the workforce now, the youngest, will be returning this money probably for most of their life. The loans that have been now taken upon by the European Union will be returned by 2058. So the decisions made by politicians today will have long-term implications. I think it's important to again state that we are promoting the spirit of personal responsibility, not collective responsibility, but personal responsibility and entrepreneurship. And one good thing that has come out of this whole situation is that entrepreneurs and voluntary organizations or associations representing entrepreneurs and their interests have become very vocal in criticizing some of the government's policies. I think that's something good for Croatian society, for civil society. There's still many battles to be fought in the future. We're fighting to bring back normalcy as soon as possible. In my view, I said from the very beginning that we must learn to live with this virus. We can't stop daily life as we know it. People have to work. People have to go out and make a living and be productive. And so there's many, obviously, implications to all of this. But I would just say, from our point of view, and I'm also a member of parliament in the opposition now, we will be continuing our fight to represent the interests of everyday Croatians. This pandemic has been, in fact, good for certain sectors, and I've read recently articles that some, in fact, have a stake in prolonging this situation. We definitely want a return to normalcy where we can get people back to work and not dependent on subsidies and not dependent on direct payments from the government to keep people's jobs so they don't go unemployed. So that's what I would say as an introduction. I think we have many things to discuss as the panel continues. But coming from Croatia, I would say that the COVID crisis has revealed again how vulnerable our economy is. Our dependence on tourism, which is also a very, I would say, vulnerable branch of the economy. We don't know how this summer will look like, but it's not good that the government is so focused on one sector of the economy. So that's what I would say in my opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Steven. Second panelist today is Andrej Grubišić. He's a professor of finance at the Luxembourg School of Business and owner of corporate finance boutique company Grubišić and Partners Corporate Finance. They are focusing on mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, valuations, due diligence, and financial restructuring. Andrej is a long-time friend of Center for the Renewal of Culture and one of the strongest voices in Croatia in promoting free market politics. Andrej.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and providing me with a chance to say a few words to this respected audience. Just before we started, we always, when we discuss these topics, we always ask ourselves what it is that we should, what we should do, and then quite often we come to the conclusion we should just continue to provide arguments and be persistent with our arguments, because the evidence goes into, I would like to say, into our favor. So all these populist type of theories and constructs, once being tested with empirical evidence, usually do not have any chance in the long run. But people love these stories because usually the story they're being told and sold is that whatever is going to be done, it's not going to be at your expense, it's going to be at somebody else's expense. But at the end of the day, it has to be at somebody's expense. Whatever has been to be distributed, it has to be created by somebody. And Milton Friedman said a long time ago that nobody spends other people's money as rational as his own money. So when I look at this, what's called National Plans for Recovery and Resilience, with all due respect, I see a lot of crony capitalism here. Basically, it's unhidden agenda that those who qualify, according to arbitrary decisions of the local governments, would be entitled to receive certain funds. What has not been said and clearly explained to the wide audience is that this is not government's money. There is no such thing as government's money. So there are only two sources of this money. One is that existing taxpayers, and when it comes to Croatia, actually, Croatia is actually privileged, being one of the poorest nations in the EU, that actually will be a net, it will be a net gainer, so to say, within this game, which is a zero-sum game. So somebody has to actually pay in order for selected Croatian businesses and institutions to receive this money. So it is the expense of the existing taxpayers of richer countries in European Union, which is, in my opinion, not really a token of justice towards them. At the same at the same time, what we have seen going on in the last several years is irrational monetary policy. When we have printing machines being turned on without any meaningful control, and which results in the fact that we have interest rates which are zero or sometimes negative, which is totally counterintuitive to from an economics point of view. And at the same time, we have inflation, and inflation is nothing but taxation without legislation. So not only that the rich taxpayers will actually pay for other people's, not on a free will basis, but this is being imposed on them. But those who are not actually directly paying these taxes will suffer because the real purchase power of their money will be decreased. So if the inflation is 2%, which is publicly set goal by the European Central Bank, well, that means that whoever earned 100 euros today will actually be taxed within 1 year with 2 euros without getting anything in return. So I think that wide audiences are not really aware of all these implications because wide audiences do not have an opportunity to speak about this because we are being preoccupied by pictures and stories being told to us by politicians. So, and then as a final thought on this, when the pandemic was declared in Croatia, I was asked whether the government should intervene, and I said yes, because there are two ways of government intervention. One is negative intervention, one is positive intervention. Well, negative intervention is the situation when actually government takes active role. Positive intervention is when government actually takes passive role. And then I was asked how this could be done. So what I propose that Croatian government does a massive tax refund to all private individuals living in Croatia. So basically all the taxes that we have paid would be, or part of the taxes that we have paid would be returned to us from the funds that the government disposes with, or by raising additional loans and indebtedness, which we will anyhow repay in the future. So it's just the government is being used as a transmission mechanism to return the taxes to us. And then the people will decide how this money would be spent. That was one suggestion. The second suggestion was that we have a linear tax reduction in Croatia. In whatever business you are in, my suggestion was that the government reduces taxes. Effectively, what would happen, that the gain would be transferred to those who would actually produce out in the market. And the government would actually make a healthy intervention. So they would return the funds to the people, and they on undiscriminatory basis, and they would reduce taxes to businesses on undiscriminatory basis, and then we would have a level playing field for everybody. But unfortunately, none of those things happen. But we continue to advocate this approach to making things easier for us.
Thank you, dear Andrej. Our third panelist is Hrvoje Sagdarušić, is an independent consultant and analyst in the field of business finance. He's a frequent guest commentator in the domestic media and is the owner of one of the longest running economic blogs in Croatia. Yes. Thank you, Hrvoje, on that, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mate. Based on everything said here, I wrote at the beginning of the pandemic, one piece of my blog was about this approach, which actually I called it Grubišić approach because my colleague has said that this approach should be done, this intervention should be done without discriminating others. But the other one that actually took the Croatian government and all the European governments took this side was the one that the government chose which companies should survive. I call it triage approach because they actually then said this company and this company will survive and this one not. In Croatian economy, our hospitality industry was very and brutally damaged by the events that happened, especially in the autumn, in October. A lot of people were left without their jobs, without their companies that they were building it. And we have now this situation that actually Croatian government stopped intervening in these epidemic measures, and we had as a country one of the most liberal measures in Europe. That was good, which actually helped that this damage that was done before, that it would not be persistent in the future. So what would I like to say also, that actually we have this free rider problem. You see that someone is free riding on intervention. So there are people who actually would like that this situation is going on. So it helps them, their business, in some ways. The other thing that it is very important to stress, it is a moral and righteous position, because we have to reiterate the position of people people are responsible, not the government. So it is very important to say that, to understand that this position of social welfare state actually brought the mentality in Western world that the government is the one who has to provide for others, and that, of course, opens the window for totalitarian state. We are now in the position that government actually controls our health system, not only here in country, but actually is the only provider, the main provider of health service. Also the education system and the pension system. And we know when the government intervenes as a player in the market, usually the consequences are some kind of damage, higher prices. For example, last week, Croatian National Bank issued a publication confirming what we all knew, that in the housing market, the government intervention drove prices up. That it wasn't the intention. The intention was to help young families to start a new life in the new house or in the new flat. But actually, the prices went high, too much. So if we go back in the pandemic sphere and these subsidies that every European country is producing to the business sector will make, as the Croatian National Bank said and other banks, it is the zombification of corporate sector. There are companies that are maintaining in the market, actually they should be erased from the market and not sustaining them. So it is better that all the governments stop subsidizing business and everything should be open. Businesses should be let down, that they operate free. So
yeah, now when these vaccines are here,
yes.
so anybody could be vaccinated and protected from the virus, then why are the measures even now needed? You know, if it's your personal choice. Are you gonna
decision?
If you have 75 years old and you come and have some comorbidities and maybe some diseases, if you don't get vaccinated, it's yours. So do you think the measures should be lifted now when here in Croatia everybody could be vaccinated, everybody who wants? In the EU, I think also in the same situation. So
not to just not to enter in the debate of that kind of debate. I'm not an expert in the health issues. I just wanted to say that other European countries are lifting all the measures.
Yes.
So,
well, some of them not.
yes, but I would say the main European countries are starting to lifting, and they are introducing that and saying that it will be free day. For example, in England, now the Austria and the Germany is also introducing something. They're saying that it will start. I would say that we have the very good position. It should be open. The economy should be let loose.
So we saw now in the Great Britain, who was struggling with this pandemic, and we see that Prime Minister Boris Johnson is now saying that he's going to lift the measures. A lot of people are vaccinated. So do you think that is the path for other European countries, that they should lift measures and, you know?
Well, my intuition is that yes, we should be pushing for this return to normalcy and for people to make decisions, you know, for themselves in freedom. I wanted just to make one point that I think is very important here, coming from Croatia. Andre mentioned the term crony capitalism. It's unfortunately the case that in Croatia, many people conflate crony capitalism with a functioning free market, and they don't understand that one is not actually a free market. We in Croatia have too much crony capitalism, and that's inevitable when government is doing too much and making too many decisions. And the statistics are clear. When we look at the numbers in the EU, Croatia stands out as a country where the share of GDP managed by the government, but also when you include public companies controlled by the government, the percentage is far too high. And this pandemic and all the measures have just reinforced again, and the Prime Minister unfortunately likes to repeat publicly that this situation has shown the need for big government. We had also this earthquake where he was making the case that the government is needed. Not much has happened, but that's another subject. But when we come to the economy, again, I'm convinced more than ever that the government is doing too much. And is making too many of these decisions, choosing winners and losers according to arbitrary criteria, and that's a new injustice. It's a new injustice.
But not just new injustice. It is not from the economic point of view. You have produced the whole sector, so to say, of people who have to arbitrate who is the winner, who is not. I mean, you have to collect the papers, put it in the process to evaluate it, and then make a decision who is to survive and who is to.
That's called
Mr. So we, by this table, we're always for freedom and bringing free market policies to as a solution to the problems in the Croatia and the EU. We know that the EU and the EU countries are more state interventionist than, for example, in the USA, we could say, or some other countries. So we were advocating to go more for these free market policies. Now with this COVID-19 crisis, the public sector is increasing more. When is this public sector going to return to the normality? We know that when public sector gets more power, it hardly gives it up. You know, how are we going to go to that times of 2019 and then maybe go to these free market policies? Is the world going in a total different direction now? Is it reversible anymore?
Yeah. Just one note on the comment that within the EU we see a growing role of governments. We see the same in the US. Actually,
yes.
all the advocates of free market in the U.S. basically say that the greatest threat that they see in the U.S. is really not a criminal rate or immigration, or it is really the growing entitlement state of the minds of a large portion of U.S. population, where people start to mix up their natural rights with their interests. And you have groups of people in US and in EU, Europe in general, Croatia including, where they're really good in formulating stories where their interests would be declared as their rights, or their interests would be declared as national interests. And very often there is really no national interest. It is really a very particular interest. And then you have this iron triangle. You have a politician who publicly communicates that he is here to help. Then you have a government agency with a staff that earns their salary by conducting these policies. And you have a private business, usually, who is actually the one who is getting the benefit out of these policies. And then you have the wide masses of us watching this, being told that it is national interest. In everyday conversation in Croatia, I often hear Croatian tourism, Croatian industry, Croatian this and Croatian that. And I ask people, well, if this hotel is a Croatian industry, if you go to the owner of this hotel and you ask for a dividend to be paid, he will probably tell you you're nuts. But a politician is telling you it is Croatian tourism. So I think that we should try to help wide audiences to understand what the reality is. There is no such thing as Croatian tourism that you mentioned. There is only businesses in Croatia, usually privately owned, that actually provide their service in tourism on the turf of Croatia. Well, what we've seen in this crisis is that the government spending, pre-crisis government spending, has remained there. There were really no real material cuts. Okay? Usually the socialists would tell you that this would have a detrimental impact on the GDP because you would reduce the consumption. Mathematically, from the short point of view, that is true. But in the long run, that is not true. Because we see the evidence in Croatia. We have a constant high involvement of government and public sector in general as proportion of a GDP. And we do not see that we are catching up with the rest of the EU. Quite the contrary, actually, ex-socialist countries like Poland, Czech Republic, Baltic countries, and so on, even Romania, have actually surpassed Croatia measured by real purchasing power parity. And all of those countries were actually way behind us 25 or 30 years ago. And I think that one of the major reasons for this is that they do not have as high proportion of government intervention as Croatia has. And just another note, very often I'm being criticized by the fact that, for instance, some rich European countries have growing involvement of governments. But we have to be careful here. Those countries, thanks to the strong private sector, have grown in the last 50 years to an average GDP of 30 or 40,000 euros per capita, and we are at 12,000. And with this approach, without actually giving more freedom and without increasing private sector, it is virtually impossible to grow more than 2% a year. And you can take Excel and do the calculation. It will never catch up with the average of the EU. So from that perspective, my calculations are showing that 2/3 of Croatian population are directly or indirectly linked to public spending. So we have 1.2 million of people who are officially enjoying the benefits of the pension system that we have. We have 400,000+ people in public sector. So it's local government, central government, all public institutions, and so on and so forth. I think that out of 400,000 people, at least would help in actually providing a living for at least one more individual as part of their family. So it's 800,000 people then. So we are now up to 2 million. We have 100,000 plus people officially being unemployed. And then I think that at least 10% of Croatian population that works in private sector actually deals a lot with the government. So we have 2.5 or 2.6 million people out of 4 million people who actually would challenge our ideas to actually change the state of the affairs, because they're the interest group. So these are the real challenges that we are currently being exposed to, and I can only repeat that the numbers are telling us that by adding more of the same thing will probably not change, will not cause any material
this
change.
argument
One question for you, Hrvoje. When money is being shared, then we always have those who are less satisfied. So we see that in Croatia, and it stirs up conflicts in the society between public and the private sector. So what do you say, how to avoid that? You know?
How to avoid what? Sorry.
How to avoid these conflicts in the society between private and the public sector?
It's a $1 million question. I would say something just to add what Andrej was telling us, that there is a Croatian saying here that the frog also lifts her leg in the air because she sees the horse going to the blacksmith. So we think that our state is so powerful, like, I don't know, Nordic countries that have great subsidies to the private sector, but actually our economy is not so strong. So we should push for more economic freedom here. And when you say that, that's my broad answer to your question. I mean, we all know that the intervention of the state usually produces something that is suboptimal position. So please, we should try to eliminate government positions in ownership. I would say, please, Croatian, also the Croatian government, whatever it will be, please remove your position of ownership in some Croatian companies. It is not needed. Only, I would say, the strategic ones, but which are the strategic ones, I would not now debate on that question. But the OECD, the organization, is also one of the requests for Croatia entering in this important organization is that we make a privatization of remaining companies that are in the government portfolio. We always say that it is not position of Croatian government or any other that produces, I don't know, some kind of chocolino. It's a trademark here in Croatia for child food. It is not position.
Mr. Bartulica, we saw that the European Union now use this pandemic to issue for the first time the EU bonds. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now this supranational entity is going to one more capability that they can do now. They can borrow money on behalf of all EU citizens. This pandemic was used. Do you think will they use this monetary? Will they use these bonds still in the future after this Corona passes?
Well, I have always been skeptical of these grand design policies in Brussels being applied to all the member countries. This is something that's a temptation in Croatia, because our politicians like to say that the conditions are much better, much more favorable for Croatia, because our rating is much weaker than the EU's as on the capital markets. But the other side is that this gives the politicians even more possibilities to raise money and to basically, put the burden on all of us. And that's why I make these statements clear to young people, that they should understand that everything that our Prime Minister is now advocating, and he's talking about billions of euro at our disposal and so on, that someone will have to repay this money until 2058, for example. So we like competition. We don't like one solution. We don't believe that one solution fits all. So we are opposed to this push for tax, for example, harmonization, or for policies being harmonized at the EU level. And if Croatia had, let's say, a more free market-oriented government, we could, I think, gain great benefit from that, looking into the future. So again, here, being in this space, we are a think tank. It's called the Center for Renewal of Culture. Culture is very important. We have to encourage young people to think of themselves, maybe in the future, as people creating their own businesses, being self-reliant, relying on their own talents. We don't want this mentality in Croatia to be reinforced, that the ideal position getting out of school is a public sector job. We're fighting, this battle. It's not easy. It's not easy. I'm aware of this, but I think there's enough arguments on our side. And Croatia, is a small country with many talented people, has, I think, a vested interest in promoting that kind of vision for Europe, not centralized, not having bureaucrats in Brussels imposing solutions on all of us, and raising money on behalf of all of us and then spending it. Because again, I'll repeat, the politicians, unfortunately, are interested in solving their own problems, not our problems, and the COVID crisis has given them one more opportunity to do this.
Perhaps not just one. Perhaps not just one.
Mr. Grubišić, you are a professor of finance. You have your own corporate finance boutique company, which does capital raisings, valuations, financial restructuring. So, how do you see this monetary tool that the European Union used, and then saying for what it should be spent? Green transition, digital transformation.
Thomas Sowell said that it doesn't really matter what's best, but who decides what's best. And it's always a question of who has the responsibility and who bears the consequences. And quite often we have a responsibility being not transferred, taken away from people and transferred to government. But however, or unfortunately, the consequences are being borne by the people. And then usually what I hear, the solution for this is not to change the system, but to change the people in government.
Yes.
So it's really not a question of what they're doing wrong and what should be done differently. It's really the question what should be stopped doing, so what government should not do. But coming back to your actual question, my suggestion to these national plans for recovery and resilience, especially in light of the money that some entities or businesses in Croatia should receive, and I intentionally say it this way because it's not that Croatia will receive it. It's usually communicated that Croatia will receive this. Well, some people will receive this. Not everybody will receive this. I thought it would be fair that for each and every euro that is not needed for whatever government thinks should be spent on public stuff. So let's give them that freedom. But our understanding is that they proclaim that there is excess money, if I can put it this way, that will be distributed to those who actually fulfill certain criteria. So that is a first step towards discrimination, for sure, without going into any detail. So I suggested that for each and every euro that comes into the budget, the Croatian government should reduce taxes on a linear basis, which effectively means they will keep the euro that comes from European Union, or from the taxpayers within European Union, and then they will not take that euro from whoever has to pay the tax in the amount of that euro, which effectively means that the money has been transferred to citizens and businesses, and then the citizens and businesses will decide on how to spend this money, whether to increase salaries, whether to invest in a property, plant, and equipment, whether to repay debt, or maybe to acquire another company, whatever they think is best for them, not whatever I think as a government bureaucrat is best for what they like to say for all of us. So, and obviously there was no way of trying to modify this. I was told by a highly ranked advisor of a prime minister that it can be done this way. So my view on this, it can be done, but you just don't want to do it this way, because then you will lose control over that money, and there will be less of crony capitalism and less of knocking on your door, and which is not on their part of their agenda. So we all know general concept as to how this money is going to be spent. So basically, it's a continuation of a zero-sum game. Taxes being paid by some people, money being transferred to some people. So no value being created. Actually, it's transferred from one individual to another individual, whether as a private individual or owner of a business. And maybe just a note on what Hrvoje was commenting on. When you're asking about the private and public sector in Croatia, I think that most people still do not accept that our idea of the government is that the government role is to protect our rights, not to create special rights for special groups of people based on arbitrary decisions. And I would exclude people whom we cannot hold objectively responsible for their decisions. So people who are mentally or physically ill or in other way unable to take care of themselves. And that's what I call solidarity. But what we are mixing up here, at least in Croatia, is solidarity with socialism, where most things, or a great amount of things, have to be controlled directly or indirectly by the government. So we are smart enough and sensible enough as objectively responsible individuals to put aside part of what we earn for those who are in need. But we do not think that the best way to help these people is that government controls those people who can be held objectively responsible for their actions. And because the result of this is suboptimal output that we have right now. So, and a note on what Stjepo said, on people starting their own business. I remember a quote from Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who was looking at protesters trying to change the world, and he told them that probably a good way to change the world is to become an entrepreneur. And this is probably a concrete contribution to actually, making something that other people would, based on their free will, be willing to purchase from you. So you would create a win-win transaction instead of trying to find another zero-sum game combination.
I saw you have something.
No, I agree.
In the beginning of this pandemic, and then when I saw that mortality rates are not as Spanish flu 100 years ago, I saw this pandemic as a great opportunity to reform all that we couldn't reform before. So what do you think?
Such voices were raised in the beginning, and the people from the government were telling this is the opportunity. But things went the other way, not just here, I mean everywhere. And this bag of, which is, let's say, full of money, is now being inflated, like in Soviet Russia when Stalin was saying it's not the one. It is very important. So it's more important the ones who are counting the votes, and here counting the votes in financial terms is the government who controls, and they are putting this way or that way. So they are deciding who is to be the winner or who is to lose. We are always saying, please remove yourself from the market game. Let the people decide freely, and not that the government is one who will decide who is going to win and who is going to lose.
Is there any time? Is there still time to do some good things?
I think there's time, and I'm certainly hopeful. I want to make one remark just generally outside of Croatia. There's many ironies in this whole drama that we're experiencing, but one of them is that China, where the virus originated, has actually benefited economically. According to their statistics, I don't trust much of the information coming from communist China, but apparently their economy grew at around 2% last year, whereas the rest of the free world is in turmoil. So there's many ironies. I grew up in the United States. Another concern, of course, is that America is beginning to look more like China, not the other way around. We have mass censorship being conducted by big tech companies and so on. That's the job of the government in China, but in America we have it coming from another direction. But the end result is the same: less freedom, more control. And so there's many ironies in what's happening around the world. I myself am a firm believer in the power of ideas, that these discussions, these panels are needed. Hopefully we'll have many people watching us, tuning in, and that this free market roadshow will continue in the future. It's a great achievement that we've been conducting these events since 2008. So we'll continue to persevere, because freedom is always, a fragile thing, and many convenient circumstances arise, and freedom, quickly disappears. So we'll continue to be vigilant, and our agenda is clear. We promote personal responsibility, limited government, and a free economy. That's our vision.
Mr. Grubesic, when the pandemic started, and then China was the all lights were on China, and then it moved to Europe, to the USA, and then there were like some news going around how China is good in controlling the pandemic, the spread, and then in the middle of all that was underlying. Beneath it was that, in a way, that technocratic, undemocratic governments could solve things better. That's what I'm afraid of as a citizen of the European Union. That as we see now in all of this, trying to manage this pandemic is that kind of same agenda.
Yeah.
Do you see that?
No. First of all, I think that's a bunch of nonsense. The second thing is, in our public discourse, we should avoid, these collectivist phrases like China did something, Germany did something. There are people who have power to do certain things, and these powers is not necessarily the opinion and the results of these powers and the deeds and actions of these powers are not necessarily the opinion of the whole population.
Should we say the Communist Party?
Yeah, well, I think that would be closer to reality. So because China has 1 point whatever billion people, what they have. The second thing is, I like when I see arguments, when I hear arguments that China is making such a great progress and then we are not. Well, just be aware that Chinese progress comes primarily from the fact that the Chinese Communist Party has allowed some of the elements of the free market to actually come into existence. So this is really the result of China's progress. And it is not the vision of a great, communist politician and leader that actually made this possible. It is just his, part of his, finally, humbleness to consent and to concede to the fact that it's just the free market and private initiative that actually can really, move things forward. And this is what we see to a certain extent happening in China. I intentionally say to a certain extent. China is far away from being a free economy and free country. Also, in order to see how people are satisfied, just look at migrations. Don't just look at how people vote at the elections, but just look at what people do with their feet, where they're going. I don't see a massive influx of people from rich countries going to China to look for opportunities. But I'm fairly sure that there are still a number of Chinese who would like to actually get maybe better opportunity in some of the countries of the Western world. So I think we should be more specific once we start glorifying the success of a nation. So that's my view on China.
We are close to our end, and please, if you can give some final remarks on our topic, and we can
maybe reverse order.
Yes, I would say something on human dignity, because what Andrei has said just before, and these countries, they lack this degree of freedom, and we now see that the freedom is endangered also in the West by all this censorship that is going on. And I see that not just part of the big tech, but also as something that government, in general terms, not specific government, they now are gaining power and can use it in whatever way they want. And to be more specific, not the government, but some government officials, they can use it. I mean, it's temptation. So that is why we are promoting limited government, in order to have our freedom, because freedom is very closely attached to human dignity.
We have one question which adds to your concluding remarks. Mr. Patrick Banek asks, what can we do to defend free enterprise in Croatia, if anything? Should I give up and move to Switzerland?
I would say I would say definitely not, because as a Croatian, I believe in this country. I believe in my children, and I believe in the children of my children, and also from my friends and my family and close. I think that we should promote optimism, because if the other position is to give up, or I don't know, to buy a rope and go to the first tree and do that, I would not recommend that. I choose to let's say, to fight, to promote the ideas of freedom, and I don't want to be intimidated by anyone. So I will be calm and promoting human dignity and freedom. So I'm not going to Switzerland.
Except for skiing.
Lead by example.
Yeah.
Another question for you, Mr. Andrei. Jadranko Brkic. Who are those in Croatia, and what percentage of Croats raise the red flag when government says that it will create yet another government program or increase public spending to remedy calamities and help those in need? And how to boost this awareness that would help the public make their elected officials more accountable and reliant on freedom solutions? And what many questions. What is the creation public awareness of a concern about government spending in general?
I think that in general, an overarching view of most people, or at least that's my perception, is that they see the government as a solution maker instead of a troublemaker. And so once we manage to, with our persistency, to change this paradigm, we may have an increased opportunity to actually start changing the system. The second thing is why we need to be persistent with our ideas. Actually, those are not our ideas. Those are ideas of the people who lived long before us, and those things are pretty much common sense. Is the crisis real or perceived, or problem real or perceived, is an opportunity to implement some sort of a change. And the things that have an opportunity to be implemented are only those ideas that are being discussed and which are around the table. So we have to be persistent in a sense that our ideas are always around the table. And with that respect, I'm happy to see that in Croatia, in my view, we for the first time have a political party that to a great extent promotes free market ideas, and they have actually their mayors got elected in several
near Zagreb,
near Zagreb in several cities. And part of the answer to the first question is we have to promote definition of economic freedom. Economic freedom is a situation where an individual has an opportunity to freely decide as to how much money that he earned he will spend on himself and his family, and for which purpose. That individual, together with his family, can freely decide on how much money and he will save and invest. Not that government does this for him. And that that same individual, together with his family, has freedom to decide how much and with which purpose of what he earned he would give to somebody else. And if you look at this definition of economic freedom, point number 2 as to how much I save and how I invest, especially when it comes to my pension, is directly controlled by the government. So it's almost completely taken away from the average Croatian citizen. And then the third part of how much of my money I have to, and for which, under which basis and for which purpose give to a third party or third person, is also directly controlled by the government. So we have to promote the definition of economic freedom, and then people would then maybe have a better idea to think whether these elements of economic freedom are actually being protected or breached by the government. And then a final note is we have to promote the idea of confinement of power, because concentration of great amount of power, even in most noble hands, and within the hands of people with altruistic and good intentions, can actually end up with decisions being passed and imposed on wide masses, inflicting damage on these masses, without these masses actually having any opportunity to control the actions of those who are in power. So this is what we call limited government. Government is there to protect our natural rights, life, liberty, and property. Everything else should be challenged and questioned by us whether any additional powers and to which extent should be conferred upon government.
We have one final question.
It's good. Good sign. Good sign. Sending questions.
We thank our audience.
Thank you.
They started to ask questions in the end.
So we are not boring.
It's a good sign.
So Branimir Petkovic is asking you, Mr. Bertolica, what's your opinion on first moves of Zagreb's mayor? What he did, rationalization of public procurement, lowered wages, in some aspect, canceling some social handouts. Would same moves be met with resistance if they were proposed by someone not favored by public and media? Would it be possible that left-wing politicians could implement sound economic policy despite their social programs?
We'll see. That's a big question. I'm myself skeptical about the agenda of Mr. Tomašević. Everything that he does as mayor that promotes transparency and is in the direction of responsible spending of taxpayer money will applaud. Well, he'll have our support. The problem with the left, as in many places, is they're captive to this vision of society, which in the end, I'm afraid, I have to say, is an anti-human view. The stress on the environment, for example, is not something that I see as a priority in Croatia. We live in a country that is not an industrial. It's not an industrial powerhouse. I'm afraid we're living in parallel reality. So what's a priority, for example, in Germany isn't necessarily a priority in Croatia. So all this talk about the green economy and so on, it's something perhaps for some future point of relevance. But we'll see. Everyone who has won an election and has assumed responsibility, I wish the best of luck to, but we'll continue to be vigilant and critical where necessary. But if there's good things that are implemented, we'll also be vocal in supporting this as well. I want to say one point in the end. I know we're concluding. You mentioned lead by example. So when we're talking about dependency, I can say that I'm very proud of the fact that our little think tank has survived over the last 12 years without receiving a penny from the government. So in that case, we're an exception to the rule in Croatia's civil society. It's possible to conduct programs, summer schools, conferences, without relying on government money. And I think that's the way forward. It's not the easiest way forward, but I think it's necessary to demonstrate that it's possible. It's not easy in the battlefield of ideas to fight everything we're confronting with limited resources, but I think leading by example is the way to go, because there's no substitute for that.
Yes, otherwise these NGOs should be called PGOs, because they're not government but pro-government, because it's really who's fighting the system or who's going against. It's the question of who is paying it. Then you are dependent on that. If you want to be non-government
So when you mentioned the question regarding our mayor, we'll see how he performs. But again, his path to power was largely financed by taxpayer money, either abroad or here in Croatia. People should keep that in mind.
Thank you, dear guests. It was a very nice.
Thank you for calling us.
Thank you, Mate, for calling us.
My final message would be to all everybody who is watching us online, that driven by this question of Jadranko Brkić, how to boost this awareness, what to do. Well, as Mr. Bartulica says, our Center for the Renewal of Culture is doing real conferences. We have academy for young leaders, which we learn about the free market policies and everything. So you can donate on our website. If you go to www.cok.hr/donate, you can donate to our little think tank, and we could do more events, and then we could go to this Western type of if we can say so, NGOs which are funded by the local people, by the population in their domestic country, and then population drive the questions through these think tanks in a direction that they want. Unfortunately, we are all here enthusiasts, non-paid. We just do this.
I would say not unfortunately, but fortunately.
We can still do this. We can still afford to do this.
Yes, we can still afford, but we invest our time in it. So donations are very important. So thanks everybody for watching our event, and thanks. See you next year, and thanks to our partners from Vienna on this great event, Free Market Roadshow, which is this year, I think, in more than 55 cities, and hope we see you again next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.